The jury lists, I'll start there. When I was looking again through one of the recent ones, about 25 years ago, the jury had Jim Polchek on it and Paul Rudolph Arnold. A lot of very well-known names, and a lot of deans of schools of architecture and so forth were there. And from time to time, as you know what happens in competitions, you look at everything. This is student work. And you say, I don't like any of it. Let's not award a prize. Well, you can't do that and be credible. But some people just felt that if we had some money and we were able to do something that we might want to try, sort of reaching out for great design in a different way than you might get it from the students, who after all, students. I mean, you compare students to other students and so forth. So that was, in one way, part of it. And if once you decide that, well, what do you do? So we thought about New York and all the various problems of New York, including the waterfront. And I think that, I guess it was still NIAE there. The name hadn't been changed to the Van Allen Institute. And incidentally, that was done to signify that we had made a change. And we started talking about problems in New York, and towards the end of that great competition area for the Paris Prize, for example, we would pick, in the major jury, we would pick 6 finalists and then get them all to come to New York, and then in our own building now, to just give them a new project in a day, and that project they wouldn't know about it. It would have to be New York oriented. I remember one, we walked them over to Washington Square Park and said, there's certain little elements here that might want to change it, but no program, just what would you do? So we gave them as much of information as we could and so forth. I remember that very well because in the jury, later that same day in the evening, one of the jurors, Jim Fitch, who was one of the deans up at Columbia, I think the head of the preservation school, he got furious. He said, how would you dare to do anything with Washington Square Park? And he walked out. So all we could do is say to the kids, well, that's part of this. There's going to be times when not everybody is going to agree with what you're doing. Now I've noticed, of course, Washington Square Park a lot of work has been done now, some of it very silly in my view, but trying to put the arch on the center of Fifth Avenue, or rather the fountain thing, centering it on the arch. Well, since the arch isn't centered on, anyway. Then, once you had some of the kids coming to New York, the idea that, well, let's have fellows and come and actually work on a project at the Institute. And we did that for a few years. The whole history that you're doing now was beginning to be talked about. Certainly some of the appreciation of some of the architecture of the time, of the early Van Allen and so forth, the Beaux-Arts, not just approach, but the landmarking and all those other kinds of things, that all of a sudden there was an appreciation, perhaps, of some of these things, what hadn't been there in the 50s, when you never thought about those things. It was all contemporary and new and modern. I know my own firm, which was a long time ago, was McKinley & White, and I remember when I was a draftsman, or just before then, they didn't want that name anymore. That was passé stuff. And I think institutions just do evolve. I do think my own is that the Institute should, or has a possibility of, as now we're, again, continuing to find out how best we can be of service. I do think that the kids in school is a place that we should maybe cultivate again, because of course they grow into all kinds of wonderful things, and who knows how that comes back and helps us out. And a lot of kids they go to architecture school, but they don't become architects. It's so important, but they become the head of the school board who's going to engage an architect, or they become citizens who support good architecture and so forth. So it's just as important to train those people as it is the people who actually become architects. So I'm a sort of a big fan of doing again some of the stuff in the schools, if they'll have us. In the early days, the reason why we started with competitions is that, first of all, there weren't many architecture schools. People worked in ateliers, and they went to work for an architect, and they probably didn't get paid much. And so this was a way to get recognition and so forth. Then the schools of architecture came in and took that role over, but we still kept on with the designs, the competitions among all schools.